Hi guys, it's me, Suze Pratt, coming to you from the third cosmic ray, unconditional love, archangels Shamuel and Charity, proximity, St. Louis, Missouri, most dangerous town they say to live in the United States. So, this little conversation that we're going to have is about, in my mind, the most incredible intellectual reading that I ever encountered that made a direct impact on the way I live my life. So, his name is Rudolf Steiner. Very few people have ever heard of him because the only time they discussed his great writings would say be in a philosophy discourse in grad school if you were interested in sociology or anthropology or spiritual works. He was someone that very many people felt to be arrogant. He was just so far ahead of his time. I feel very close to him. So, I would like to read to you what he says about learning to read. It says learning to read again. Today, I know that people must be capable of reading in quite a new way. It works like this, or to convey what they really are. One must be able to read freely, with much more open-mindedness than is required, with different kinds of writing, in order to precipitate acceptance on one hand, and over hastily denial on the other. One must read such books with interactivity, constantly putting what is read to the test of life, and life to the test of what is read, so that one's own firm stand in life is fortified against the flood of new statements. And furthermore, one must be able to read meditatively, with constant and fairly long pauses, building up again within oneself, and listening with calmness and unimpeded freedom to what one's own spirit and experience has to say to it. Theosophy, anthroposophy, helps by drawing your attention, in its own strange and unfamiliar jargon, to current conceptions which otherwise would have passed you by. Then it has rendered you a service which it will not be easy for anything else to render, at any rate in such a fundamental sense. Very well then, I will honestly let this wholly different picture of the world work upon me. These were Rudolf Steiner's words on the occasion of his first lecture to the teachers in 1919 Germany. Runs as follows. Let us therefore, at the beginning of this, our introductory activity, first of all turn our minds to how, in all particulars, we place ourselves in connection with the spiritual powers under whose command, under whose mandate, as it were, we must work. Let us regard ourselves as people whose karma has placed in a situation from which nothing ordinary should go forth, but where something should happen which is to be felt by those who share in the task, as bearing in itself the significance of a solemn cosmic moment. I've got to stop right there. For those of you guys who know me, ever since I have come on to Facebook, I have been speaking to you about the phenomena that has been in progress. And I say confirmation of spirit when I am sharing with my friends that, look, something's going on here and let's investigate it together. So to me, everything that I have seen in this incredible online movement to save the world and to save ourselves and to arise in love and to meet the requirements of ascension. In my book, Steiner was talking about it 100 years ago. And I'll bring more up about that later, but I want to get back to his words. I want to, well, hey, these aren't Steiner's words, these were written. Well, yeah, these are exactly Steiner's words, yes. Okay, I want to especially stress that the movement has succeeded in demonstrating in the Waldorf school that it does not work in a narrowly sectarian, egotistical spirit, but rather in a spirit so universally human that the background out of which its pupils come is no longer discernible. It is superfluous, in the case of the Waldorf school, to ask whether its origin was anthroposophy. The only question is whether children who receive their education there are being properly educated. And I said in my first lecture here, we must realize that anthroposophy is the parent of this movement. Oh, there's a long story in there, guys. Okay. Teachers have a similar task, and to a special degree, people engaged in practical life. For their functions are a kind that draws the heaviest fire against anthroposophy, which despite its special potential for practicality, is most viciously attacked as being impractical. Waldorf school pedagogy is based on taking man's external as well as temporal nature into account. The movement has now gone through 3 phases, during the last of which anthroposophy has been neglected in favor of various offspring movements. It must be rediscovered as the living spiritual movement demanded by modern, civilized life, and most especially by modern hearts. Please take my words as meant to serve that purpose. If they have sounded sharp, please consider them the most sincerest offered. They were intended not as an invitation to any further caustic deliberations, but as a challenge to join in a movement guided by a true heart for anthroposophy. And so, if you let any of this teaching get into you, you will start as a pupil and remain one for the rest of your life. You will have to build up your spiritual outlook from its very foundation. At the moment when you thought you were standing as a teacher before men, and when moreover, they were looking for and needing you. Pretty deep, huh? Okay, so who is this guy, Rudolf Steiner, anyhow? And these words, right here, come from a dear friend. Now, before I read this, I want to tell you how I came to know Rudolf Steiner. One day, I was in a used bookstore, and sometimes on YouTube you hear about books calling out to people, or you hear about books jumping on off shelves, and they always say, come on now, you know that's not literal. And I'm going to tell you the same thing, but these books were calling to me. And so I would grab up a few, and I'd sit down in this eclectic bookstore on the Del Mar City Loop, and I would read them. And some of them spoke to me like I was there when they were written, and that's how I knew it was a book for me. Other ones of them were way over my head. So I would purchase a couple and take them home and begin the reading. Now, this was especially problematic because I was in my old life. And like I told you on other videos, which you may or may not have seen yet, I had always wanted to be normal, but my life never was. And God had a different plan and wrapped me in his loving, her loving arms and raised me up to be able to do the job that I now sit in front of you here to do. So, I knew when I brought these books home to my old world, when I was married to my ex, that it would be the end of my marriage, because he had no interest in me really encountering the spiritual side of life. Very earthy Taurus, nice guy. Thought I was a little nuts when he first met me and I was hanging out with a world-famous psychic. And when I got pregnant, I had to make a decision. between an old woman's prophecy that I would become her legacy, which terrified me on a certain level, or becoming one of those nice, normal moms that has a hair shop and takes her kids to work. So I went for that second option, obviously. So when I found these books, it was between 2004 and 2005 that they made a major impact. And by 2007, I had left my old life and moved to the third cosmic ray, where my twin flame soulmate and myself have a job. And we filter love out to the rest of a community that is in absolute chaos to change reality. And that's really what we're all doing now, as what we are seeing come to pass. So, everybody online, and now we'll talk about the awesome doctors, the scientists, the metaphysicians, the scholars, and the philosophers are all talking about spiritual science, and poof, they've connected it to God. We have been waiting for this for so flippin' long. It's incredible, everything Steiner put together. And I want to give you a little background. When he came on the scene in the early 20th century in Germany, he was speaking to adults who were able to invest time in the pursuit of spiritual studies. So he spoke a lot about karma and about the continual evolution of our souls through time and space. The whole past understanding even of the human race in different epochs and evolutions and even forms. And of course that had to surely sound crazy in the early 1900s, no doubt. But here we are, and so I say confirmation of spirit of the phenomenon in progress, because that's exactly what we know to be true now, and science is proving it. So, isn't this exciting? Now, it makes me so happy to be around other people that actually know who the great Rudolf Steiner is. So, I'd like to read this to you, and these are things I put together years ago. And this is beautiful. This says, concerning Rudolf Steiner's personality. And these are words from a dear friend. So the first one we read was Steiner's words, and now we're going into someone else's. And it says, and so I do not repeat Dr. Steiner's words literally, as they were actually spoken. I give them as they live in my memory and take responsibility for their substance and meaning, but not for their literal exactitude. But those few have an obligation to all mankind, both in what they ask and investigate, and in the answers and information vouchsafed to them. It seems as Rudolf Steiner himself understood and approved of my attitude. He knew that I should not regard it as my own possession, but give it to mankind at the right time. The hope is that people from quite different spheres of life, doctors, teachers, artists, politicians, and working class alike, for not until the story is enlarged and supplemented can a true picture of Rudolf Steiner and his many contributions come into being. If I wish one thing from destiny, it is that I may not pass by the greatest spiritual phenomena of my day. What are these wishes when they arise in man? Are they a premonition of what's to come? Are they dim remembrances of a charge whispered by our angel when we were relinquished to the earthly world? But precisely this feeling of mine was misinterpreted by well-meaning friends. The ultimate will to truth, I say, It with all emphasis was not in them. They also lacked the assured sense of self, which is never lost if it finds its right place in the universe. And they lacked that realization of responsibility which, without the fever of ambition, knows that the freely given help of all good and active men due to one who is the greater worker of them all. He immediately found himself in the presence of a superior knowledge, and how, as a result of Dr. Steiner's advice, he had quickly escaped the undesirable byways and had been guided to a path of sure and healthy spiritual development. And so we speak of worlds which are today still foreign to the majority of human beings. When you understand more of the whole, many things that now weigh heavily will clear up. Should not your conception of the whole be determined by its own life and being? Should not that perhaps that kind of repentance which makes a man honest and brave enough to realize his own smallness in the presence of a new body of knowledge be laid upon an intellectual age and a generation proud in the spirit? So, the books, I bring them home, and I'm telling you, I know I was there. I understood the words. And it's interesting, something Steiner said, so I'm going to say this as confirmation of spirit to the seekers on the path and to the friends that I've disclosed this to already. One of Steiner's most poignant stories to me. Well, okay, so he was the rage of Europe, all right? And this was pre-World War I, through World War I, and then pre-World War II. And like I said, the first group, very metaphysical and spiritual discourses. The second wave, and these worked in 7-year cycles as we go over in life charting, was just a tremendously huge group of influential people. And they all had different interests. Just like today, there's so many people that they say they're interested in spiritual matters, but where they put themselves is not in spiritual matters. They're mostly talking about things of the physical world, and so we don't really want to shatter people's realities, and Steiner knew that. At this point, he had private lectures, and he also had public lectures, and I think that's a beautiful way that he dealt with it the best he could, and it worked very well. In the third cycle, here came even more people, and so many of the youth during that time, and these youth had been affected terribly by World War I. So, for example, the Waldorf school system. I hope I tell this story right. Steiner was terrified to make this a reality because his biggest fear was that it would be something that became only for the wealthy or for the elite. And he actually opened the school system with the heart-brain of watching these children grow up whose parents were factory workers in Germany, a lot of them in cigarette manufacturing plants. So Steiner was trying to bring art, nature, and music to children that had been traumatized by war, much like today. Now, much like today, current time, my son was blessed to go to a Waldorf school for a few years, and the tuition was $10,000. And I do want to emphasize that I was one of the only people from the ghetto bringing my child there. And one time I was speaking with an uber intellectual hippie dude that really wasn't feeling it from the heart. He was looking on it, the outside view, and I had said how fortunate I felt to be in a place where they consider a slide scale depending on my level of socioeconomic viability. And he looked at me and he said, you know, We really don't want a lot of people like that. Well, of course now. Here's Steiner's prophecy coming to pass, and we are in a time right now where if we want to save the school system, I promise you what's going to happen is they will incorporate the Waldorf philosophy into every public school, into every private school, and every child will have art, nature, and music with all of their core subjects. They learn exactly the same, but even a little better, because in the Waldorf school movement, they work with the 7 soul types, and that has to do with a child's temperament. So let's say if one is not where they need to be in a particular subject, that person isn't bullied or ostracized or put into a special class. They are geared and directed towards something that they have interest in, that they are good at. So I think that is so important in today's society, considering the jobs we have now, or that we had a decade ago, will not be the jobs of the future unless they are centered in right livelihood, which means they do something either to benefit the individual, the community, or the globe. And the Waldorf school movement does meet every one of those requirements. So in the future, I do hope that I see that day, and I look forward to that beautiful imagination. Steiner always spoke about it takes imagination, which leads to intuition, which is, that little voice inside of you, to great inspirations. That is co-creating reality. That is coming here to fulfill your dharma. And so, Steiner, back to the sad story, he was in his 3rd group and the movement was huge. And, people would line up to speak to him every day, just like the great Edgar Cayce and different people who were healers and people that helped the masses. And so his Gothanaeum was burnt down. And of course, by now we have the Nazis coming into the picture. And interestingly enough, if you look back in your history and you discover how into metaphysics and the occult that Hitler was, now I want you to draw a bigger picture and open up your minds and understand and understand that that was the battle of the dark and light. Steiner, bless his heart, the light, Hitler, the dark. So, the Gothanaeum was burned down, and Steiner was talking to his people that he had put in the head positions. So he had, of course, the field of medicine, the field of education, the field of metaphysics, the field of the socioeconomic threefold order. He had a lot of things, and he had put very close people in charge of those. And he brought them together, and he said, guys, don't be sad. I know that you know that we are not going to accomplish this beautiful mission we had in this lifetime. But I promise you this, we will reincarnate. I like the word incarnate better myself, but we will come back by the end of the 20th century to accomplish this work. And I want to share something with you. Steiner had a story about the Archangel Michael and Aramim. And Aramim is an aspect of Lucifer, or let's say a Luciferian influence. Let's not judge and condemn an individual entity. Let's look at a sociological reason for a situation. So, Aramin wanted to build the most beautiful, perfect social model. Imagine Greece with all their statues, or Rocky Horror Picture Show where everybody freezes. That is how Aramin trapped souls. So the old story goes that Archangel Michael sits behind Aramin in a great cave, waiting for God to give the go-ahead. I think we're there. So, confirmation of spirit. But I really do believe that all of these spiritual groups have anthroposophy in common, even if they've never heard that word. And of course, my new friends are all very intellectual. So they know Steiner, and it just brings me home to a place, because where I live, nobody knows Steiner. So, for those Steiner fans, now I'm going to show you a collection of books that, if you can believe, made it over on the trip when the Jews were escaping Nazi Germany. And these two people came to settle in St. Louis, down by the Loop. And their names were George and Gisela O'Neill. And they wrote the magnificent book, The Human Life. This is the book that my original life chart comes from, that maybe you've seen on YouTube. I am bringing together other ways to suggest and help people to be able to life chart. Think about how many funerals that you might have been to in the recent past where the family puts the collage of pictures up, and we have great-grandpa all the way back to a little boy, but we have no words to bond stories together. Think of life charting as that. It opens up a huge screen into an otherwise small snapshot. So, the people that brought the books lived in a huge mansion down on the right part of town by the famous Forest Park, which is close to the Loop. And as they got older, they brought their book collection to this used bookstore. And oddly enough, they said to the people that owned the bookstore, they said, there's going to be somebody coming for these books that we don't want to have them because they already have all of them. They need to be given into the hands of someone who has never experienced them. And so as I was buying them up, they were getting to know me, of course, and this is pretty much the entire collection that they had to offer. And like I said, it took me a couple of years. But it was funny when I enrolled my son into the Waldorf school and met the founder of the school, which was my dear friend Brian Wessling. Believe it or not, confirmation of spirit, her and her husband were the very ones that they did not want to receive the books because they already had the whole collection in German. So it wasn't like they didn't want them to have them because they were bad people or something. They really had that heart desire to get the books out and knew somebody was coming to receive them. And there is a story about Brian right here. And we might do that in a whole other video. She's no longer in the physical plane. She sends light and love from the astral. And I was very close to her. When I first met her, I had no clue that she ran the school. And I was talking to her about that Steiner story that I quoted to you about knowing that they weren't going to fulfill their mission and how sad they were. And she looked at me like I was nuts, and she said, "Do you really for real believe that?" And I said, "Oh yeah." Now, we were so close, like I said, and she developed a rare form of uterine cancer. And she was trapped, let me bring the picture back, trapped in a vehicle that had suffered so much pain. And I never say that I'm speaking for someone, but as well as I know Brian, it was so hard for her to be an anthroposophist because actually, if you're in the Waldorf school, you really don't speak about spiritual science because it's slightly inappropriate age-wise in the way the movement split apart after Steiner's death. Originally, I think Steiner, surely, I mean, let's look at his great institutions, say here in the United States. If you're on either of the coast, from what I hear, you can enroll your child in the Waldorf school as early as preschool, and it goes all the way through college. So everything, just like any dedicated, loving parent, was always spoon-fed age appropriately, if you ask me. I think that's the storyline, and I think that there is a tremendous amount of healing that needs to be done between the anthroposophy movement and the Waldorf school. And I hope to be a part of that, never an agitator. So, I'm just telling old stories. Alright, George and Giselle's book. The one right next to it is a lovely book. And this was Steiner's wife, Marie Steiner. And here's Rudolf. So, Marie was a linguistics, musical, play production, kind of a woman. That's where her love and interest was. Steiner, of course, obviously had his own interest as well, and they made this beautiful union. It reminds me of Joe and myself. Even though I'm going through this phenomenon, and every day since September 1st, I'm directly experiencing it. I mean, really, I can't tell him everything that happens each day, and when I try to, it gets on his nerves. He knows what's going on. We're actually one. We have no secrets from each other. And you know, the other day, I said to him, you know what? I'm not going to worry anymore about whether or not I tell you what happens in any given day. Because I know one day when the time's right, all of the information that was uploaded to me will transfer into you, and you'll know everything just like you already know about me. So, this book holds a lot of significance to me. It was written by a gentleman, and his name is Dr. Friedrich Rudolmeyer, and he is going to tell of his personal experience here with Rudolf Steiner. He spent 10 years of apprehension studying him. He did a critical investigation and a cautious scrutiny of the new body of thought, and his final conviction was of the unparalleled greatness of Steiner's spirit. Dr. Rudolmeyer was exceptionally well fitted to investigate and prove the value of Steiner's work. He was a highly qualified theologian who at the time occupied one of the most influential pulpits in Germany. His meeting with Rudolf Steiner led to the most crucial experience of his life, and ultimately he became the first leader of the movement for religious renewal called the Christian Community, which was founded in 1922. This book was written shortly after Steiner's death, and it continues to convince men all over the world that Steiner was truly a servant of Christ. Some think that he was something else because the people had no perception of the words, and instead of having experience to discern, they judged him through their own fears, much like what's happened to me in my own life. And that's why there will always be an understanding and a continuance of purpose when you find where your role is. So I'm going to put these down. And I'm going to bring up another one. This is Fundamentals of Therapy. And this would be Steiner's medical work. So now at this point, I think I'm going to pick up this piece of paper and do a little more reading. Anthroposophical Medicine. The Anthroposophy Society is a worldwide spiritual movement based on the work of Rudolf Steiner, an Austrian scientist and philosopher. The basis of thought behind it is to give a truer meaning and focus to our deeds on earth. Steiner was concerned by the one-sided materialistic view of life and looked for a more spiritual world. He extended this higher thinking into a very pragmatic and educational way into several key fields such as farming, medicine, and sociology. In order to make food more nutritious and less damaging to the body, he spawned the biodynamic farming, which has grown popular since the 1920s. Biodynamic farming involves a new understanding of the relationship between plant, animal, and soil, avoiding the use of harmful pesticides, and using the cycles of the moon and the seasons to ascertain ideal planting times. Hey, is this sounding familiar? Isn't this awesome? It is a complicated process, but can produce the optimum yield in a minimum space. The process, though it sounds unscientific, has produced extraordinary results with organic food, medicine, and cosmetics. Okay. We'll let that go. Alright, so, if you check out Steiner on medicine, you're going to feel the vibration of alchemy. And I'm going to leave that in those few words, because I'll be here forever telling you about all Steiner stuff. Now, here's another guy you might have ever heard of. His name is Carl Unger, and he wrote Principles of Spiritual Science. This is going to be a very important book to our little family here that's involved in this study. But in the meantime, let's hit it and get it, right? Towards the 21st Century by Bernard J. Levengood, MD. Very relevant. This was one of my favorites here. I was more exposed to the metaphysical spiritual end at first. Initiation, eternity, and the passing moment. This resonates so much with the multidimensional universe and multidimensional realities, and I think you'd like it. Another one of our favorites, Awakening to Community, and that's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Here we have another spiritual book called Foundations of Esotericism. And, of course, when you see artwork like this, I think especially back then it might have spooked him a little bit. Such big words and such dreamy concepts. All of Steiner's messages were delivered in what's called lectures. And, of course, he had a stenographer that lovingly took his notes. There wasn't any computers back then, was there? Okay, here's a very interesting one that should be confirmation of spirit. Twin roads to the new millennium. Could that possibly suggest 3D and 5D reality? Is it possible? Is it possible that we create our own reality, and pretty soon, as our shift keeps hyper speeding through this thing we consider to be time, it just goes to show we have a God of love, and not everybody's road is the same. So the way I put it to people is, if we go back to the Bible and it says that God has prepared a room for you in the mansion of his home, you know what? Somebody that's done a lot of good works and has worked on their karma and their dharma throughout their time, they could have a beautiful mansion view with a big bay window. Now let's say that we have someone that maybe spent 49% of their existence negative, but still the good outweighs. Wouldn't they be thrilled to have a small room on the bottom floor with no window, but to be in the presence of that almighty creative one source energy? I think it's cool. Alright, so now we get into some sociology and something that Steiner wanted everybody to know. And I think now that we have confirmation of spirit through all of our religious training coming together, is that if you incarnate through the East, they know that Buddha's path was the same as Jesus the Christ. Here we are over here in the West, and our doorway is absolutely through Jesus the Christ. But it took us a minute to figure out that Buddha carried a very important, profound message of one very similar to Christ, and that's about transcendence. Look at Islam. They say that actually Jesus is mentioned more times than Muhammad. So maybe if Christians in the West knew that our brother Jesus Christ is in their holy books, maybe all of a sudden they could see that it's no different than, say, for example, me being Lutheran. When I chose Lutheran for myself at 12, the Catholics and the Lutherans were not cousins, and I was not welcome to be involved in their world. Now, in this last 10, 15 years, it's almost like we were moved up to a cousin status, and the gossip behind the scene was that the Lutheran and the Catholic Church was losing such drastic numbers that they decided they better come together. Better united than divided, right? So, this one's called The Inner Impulses of Evolution, The Mexican Mysteries, and the Knights Templar. Here's another one, wild one for you. I always think of the Mayan things with this when I pick up this book. It says man in the past, the present, and the future, and the sun initiation of the Druid priest and his moon science. Now that would make most Christians go running for the hills thinking they were talking about some kind of terrible devil, but that's absolutely not the case. Okay. Here's a picture of the Gothanaeum on this book. And it says, working together on Rudolf Steiner's mystery dramas. He loved play production, and the only thing that was really left of the mystery schools here on Earth were the plays and the beautiful stories that were told in accordance to the religious calendar and the calendar of astronomy, the stars and the science. And of course now we know that that's all part of God's creative hand as well. There's no questions anymore. Human needs and cosmic answers. This is beautiful. It goes through each month of the year. Upstairs in the treatment room where the biomat is, sometime you'll see the pictures high on the wall of these beautiful, dreamy paintings, and you really can't put your finger on what they are. They are actually the life process of a seed and the spiritual feeling behind the growth, the death, and the rebirth cycle of nature and man. And of course now we know there is no such thing as death. We change form. 7 soul types, one of my favorite. A lot of personality test information comes out of ideas associated with the 7 soul types. Man's being, his destiny, and world evolution. And last but not least, and I did this in no order of course, this one is the tension between the East and the West. Now I'm coming to you from Missouri, and unusually enough, oh right, it's not unusual, it's synchronicity. I'm here for a purpose. I've chose to be here my whole life. But say Missouri, we're the only divided state in the United States. They wanted to keep it even between pro-slavery and everybody's free. So they kept Missouri divided. And even here where I live, there's division between elitist and people that are of a lower socioeconomic. There is a division between color and age. And it is our destiny to change these things with love and the 6 heart virtues. So, thanks for spending time with my friend Rudolf Steiner and I. I'd say he appreciates it more than I do. So with that, peace, love, and light from the Big Yellow House. Namaste.